Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so after World War II, this phenomenon called immigration started evolving more and more because people started looking for better jobs, better life quality, and so on and so forth. And my job today is to show you how exactly this is actually a mirage and how exactly the immigration from developing countries actually does more harm than good. First of all, let me start by explaining to you how exactly what we understand by immigration, developing country, and illegal. By immigration, we understand living your country for working, long time, going in a different country for money, and so on and so forth. And by developing country, we understand countries that are not yet oriented on services, that are still evolving, their economy is still evolving, such as Eastern Europe or South America, etc. Countries in these areas. And by illegal, we understand that the developing countries should stop their people from leaving for working abroad for a long time. What's happening at this moment is that we are meeting a phenomenon called the brain drain, and I will explain that later in my arguments. We are seeing skilled people leaving their countries because they feel unfulfilled or they feel that they're not paid enough for their skills. So this is what drives them to go abroad. Now, during my speech, I will structure it on two main points. First of all, I will talk from the point of view of the developing countries, and second of all, from the point of view of the developed countries. That's where immigrants go. On the developing countries, I will have certain points. First of all, I'll talk about the brain drain, as I already told you. Second of all, I will talk about how these people can actually help to develop their country and be there to help it evolve. No, thank you. Third of all, I'll talk about the fact that young people leaving the country and all people remaining in the country is a bad thing and how that affects us. And then on my second point, thank you, about the already developed countries where these immigrants are going to, I will explain to you how immigrants are being underpaid, they're being discriminated, and how nationals lose their trust in their governments, and which leads to frustration. Okay, so let's start again looking from the point of view of the developing countries. Phenomenon that happens there is brain drain, as I already said. This is bad because quality people who can actually do good in their country, like good doctors or good engineers or people who are good in their domain, they leave that country for another country in order to get more money. And this means that people get displeased with the services they get. What it basically means is that inside that country, what we have are mediocre people, average people, people that are not very good at what they're doing. No, thank you. And therefore, people who receive those services, like if I go to a hospital and I'm not properly taken care of because there are no thank you, there are no good doctors at the moment, I will get displeased with this service, and I will therefore lose trust in the state. Yes.
Why do you think it's a bad thing for people to go to a developed country, gain the necessary experience, become an expert in your profession, and then go back and help develop the country they originated from?
Well, it's bad because that, in theory, it sounds perfect, but actually nobody's going back. Once you go there and you settle there and you see that you actually do make more money than you would have made at home, then a very insignificant percentage of people, no thank you, come back at home. And what we're talking about is that we need those people that leave, we need them to stay in this country and help it develop it. And this leads me to my second point, the fact that immigrants need to help develop their own countries. Even if they get lower paid in their country, if they stay there and they work for it and they offer quality service, that is the basic thing that helps that country's economy evolve. And that is the way, no thank you, to have to be better paid in the future themselves. To raise the life quality by offering, no thank you, by offering quality themselves. And this is the road to reaching economic growth and ultimately having better paid jobs, because that is what they're looking for. Now, let me talk a bit about the fact that young people, they're the ones that are leaving, because it's easier for them to move to a different country, no thank you, to settle there and to make a life for themselves. In the moment that all these young people are going away and all the workforce is going away, most of the people remaining in a country are older people who are, no thank you, who receive a pension from the state. And who pays that pension? The people who work at the moment in that country. And since there are so few, the taxes will rise so that they will be able to cover the pensions of the old people. And therefore we get a vicious circle out of this migration. No, thank you. Further on, Further on, the economy works like this. We have demand and we have offer. And the moment that our offer does not fully fulfill the demand, or is not the quality is not as good as it could have been, we have two scenarios. The demand stays unfulfilled and therefore people get frustrated, or they lower their expectations because they get okay with the idea that, well, this is it, this is the quality that I'll get, which is actually average, and they will this will hurt them in the long run. No, thank you. Okay, now I'll move on to my second argument, which is about from the point of view of the developed countries. But before that, yes.
So do you mandate students who get accepted, let's say if I'm from India and I get accepted to a school in the United States, do you mandate me to go back to India or not go to university at all in the United States after I'm done?
No, I will ask you to go back to India and help your country with the things that you have learned. Thank you. No, thank you. The developed countries. Okay, people go to, for example, I'm from Romania, okay, and I go to the UK to get more money. But actually, I'm being underpaid in that country because I am seen as a cheaper labor force. And in that moment, people, the money I make are not as the same as the natives that are in that country. But this leads further on to the fact that I'm taking jobs from the natives, or this is how they perceive me, as taking their jobs. And therefore, I get discriminated. And nationals, further on, natives, they lose their trust in their government because they go like, oh, look at that foreigner coming here and taking the job that I could have had, the money that I could have gotten. Or on the other side, companies who hire, they realize that immigrants are a cheap labor force, and they don't help them to advance in their career, or they constantly underpay them. And therefore, what we are actually saying is that this is all just a mirage. And this leads, of course, to frustration, to hate and violence against that particular ethnic group or that particular group of people from a certain country. And when an immigrant will aim for higher jobs, they will feel frustrated and discriminated because they won't be offered to them, because they will keep being seen as a cheap labor force, and they will be used as a cheap labor force. Okay, so what I've actually told you is that this is all a mirage, that people should stay in their countries and help their countries evolve. So for all these reasons, I make it to propose. Thank you.
Are you ready to?
Yes.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a side opposition that believes in freedom and that believes in the right of mobility. Welcome to a side opposition that allows people to move freely wherever they want because that is their right. Now, on side opposition today, we believe we have to promote something like immigration as a global community because we've been talking about things like freedom and because we've been talking about things like non-discrimination and the right to mobility. Now, the resolution before us today is, again, this House believes that immigration from developing countries should be made illegal. Now, before I go on to my three main contentions today, I'd like to go on some rebuttal on some major flaws we saw on the first proposition today. Now, the three main contentions we'll be expanding on today's side opposition is the following. The first, the need to immigrate. Secondly, the benefits for all actors, including the countries accepting these people and the immigrants. And my partner Christina will be talking about how the harms will increase if we don't legalize immigration. Okay, so let's dive right into some major flaws we saw inside proposition today. Now, they talked about how immigrants would be underpaid when they went into a specific country. But actually, what we see is that, especially in like Western liberal democracies, we see constitutions have been made so that there is no discrimination, so that they do have a fair chance in what they do and in what they work. And actually, we saw a very contradictory side from proposition because they firstly said that they'd be underpaid, but then they suddenly told us and said that they'd be taking all the jobs from these natives. This obviously doesn't make sense because if they were underpaid, they wouldn't be taking the jobs anyways. So we see that like when these like immigrants come and like become either like a refugee, not this time, become a refugee or become like a permanent resident, we see that like they'd have the equal chance as the native people in that specific country. And just for like a personal example from where I come from, in Canada, we have very high immigration rates. like we see a very multicultural community in Canada and especially in Vancouver. And what we see is that we have a very diverse work system. We have a very diverse, multicultural way of living, and this doesn't harm the immigrants, and this does not harm the natives. And that's what we saw Side Proposition try to tell you today. Now they also said that young kids are moving to these new countries because it's a good thing and because it's easier for them to move. And that's exactly what we're trying to prove to you today. Side Proposition actually agreed with us in saying that yes, young kids are moving to these new countries because one, they have the right to freedom, and two, they have the right to mobility. So why can't these young people move and get a better life for themselves? I think what Proposition is missing today is that these kids and these adults are moving from a developing country, ladies and gentlemen. They're not moving from a sustainable country like Great Britain, but they're moving from places like Ethiopia where they can't create a good job and they can't have a good sustainable life. That's why we want to immigrate, and that's why we want them to immigrate, not at this time. Okay, so now that I've thoroughly taken down First Proposition's case, let's delve into my two main contentions today. Now, first, I'll be talking about how they need to immigrate and that they need to have that sense of freedom and that sense of mobility. Now, in a lot of these developing countries we're talking about today, things like wars and things, not at this time, things like wars and things like drone strikes and things like that, that makes their lives harder. That makes their life not sustainable to the degree that they can live a good, sustainable lifestyle. That's why we have that need to immigrate. I'll take you right now, sure.
Are you sure you know the difference between a third world country and a developing country?
Sure, I'm talking about developing country and a third world country. We're not saying that every third world country or every developing country needs to have people immigrate, but what we're focusing on is that these people have the right to immigrate, which is why we cannot make immigration illegal. Not at this time. Oh, no. Okay, so let's get back into what I was talking about in the first place. Now, when we have things like people like refugees and people who are in these developing countries needing to immigrate, what we see is that they get an equal chance in this new country. What we see in their native country at this moment is things like segregation, is things like discrimination. For example, the Romas who aren't being having the right chance and having the freedom to live out their life in their native communities. What we see is that they're being segregated into bad schools. They're not getting enough wage, and they're not being accepted into their society, into their own culture. So what we feel is that we have to do is we have to give them the right to immigrate and to move to a new sustainable environment, a new better environment for themselves and for their families. What we need to focus on is that political nation of immigrants is important and is the key to a global unified community. Political structures is based on immigrants, based on the vision of the world, as we see in countries like the United States and in Canada. So we see that it's very important to allow these immigrants to go wherever they want and have that sense of mobility, because that is a human right that we all promote. And Side Proposition isn't going to come here and tell you that they can't move because they don't have the right to mobility, because they certainly do. Sure.
What the opposition has missed so far is the larger picture of the main stakeholder, that is the developing country and how it is affected when these people leave.
Okay, well, my partner is actually going to be talking about how it will actually harm that country. But right now I'll be talking about my second point, which is how it actually benefits these immigrants and it benefits the countries accepting these people. Now, when we legalize something like immigration, what this does is it decreases the amount of illegal immigrants. What this does is it creates a more sustainable environment for this country that is accepting these people as well. Not only would we see the economy rising because we would have more workers, because we would have people paying more taxes, because we would have more people being involved in society, but what we see is, again, that we have to focus on the multiculturalism of this issue. What we see is that because things like economy, because things like taxes and workforce would be on a greater scale when more people come to a country, we see that this topic of immigration needs to be legalized, as it wouldn't only benefit the immigrant who would have a more sustainable, better life, but we see that it would actually also improve the the status of the country accepting these immigrants as well. So we don't actually see any harms in accepting these immigrants, as they do have, again, I've said this many times, they have that right to mobility and that sense of freedom. So what have I really talked to you today about? Now, I've really taken down the first prop's case in that we saw many flaws and many contradictory statements about people getting overpaid and people getting underpaid and things like that. And my 2 points have been about how they need to immigrate and that we need to get a more global community. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, today's side proposition wants to look at the world differently. Wants to look at the world where immigrants actually stay in their country, actually want to do something good for their country. How are we going to look at this world from side propositions bench? Well, we're going to look at it on two main ideas, the long-term effect or the short-term effect. Before passing on to my point, which is the worldwide impact, I'm going to tackle a few points which the opposition brought us to us today. Let's see on the long-term versus short-term effect. Well, we have developing countries, which, by the way, are stable countries, not third world countries where people drop bombs and where we have civil war. They're mostly stable countries that have certain issues or that are not as high as, I don't know, America or Germany or bigger countries. Well, while at the same time, these developed countries have already developed it. So basically they can use all their people in their country, as they've done until now, and remain on the same level, not go down to a lesser developed country and still make it okay for them. But at the same time, we can see that a developing country who loses people, especially for the phenomenon of brain drain, as my colleague told you, is going to have a lot of problems. So basically it's going to remain a developing country forever, and the world will not change its status quo. Now, they told us that they have, no thank you, they have the right to freedom, to mobility, and they can do whatever they want with their life, with an example from Ethiopia. Well, we're not talking about Ethiopia or third world countries, we're talking about second world countries here that have certain issues, let's say one of them generally corruption, for example, that are growing, no thank you, and that can actually move without having a problem of being killed where they're going. Now, about this right to freedom. As I explained to you, our side proposition today wants to look at the big picture. And how do we do that? If we keep these people, these immigrants in that country is going to evolve. That country is going to resolve its problems in a second piece, and thus become in itself a developed country. She wanted the first one. First way.
So you talk about looking at the big picture and how these people create a better society for their own country, but you realize that by trapping these people in their country and how they want to immigrate to a different country doesn't actually make them increase their country as well.
Well, man, we have two possibilities for that person in that country. Right now, he can either immigrate to another country or he can stay in that country. If we cut off the immigration part, for sure he's not going to stay there and wait for something divine to fall out of the sky. No, ladies and gentlemen, he's going to work. He's going to work so that his country becomes a developed country, so that his country can reach that level of the country in which he wanted actually to go, so that he can receive a better pay. Well, coming back to the point of the pay, this pay actually is going to be underpaid in those developed countries because you can't go there as an immigrant and ask for the same pay as a native did, even if we're talking about high jobs or low jobs or whatever, because the companies actually exploit these immigrants by getting them underpaid. And this underpay actually is problematic. Why is that? Because they don't obtain the full benefits. If they work for their country, they actually will know what underpaid means, what overpay means, and they're actually going to have a good idea. Now, about the fact that their problem, the economy rises, we have more taxes if immigration is legal and so on and so forth. But as I already told you, these countries are already developed. So basically, right now, Germany, yes, anybody could use more money, but right now, Germany, for example, can sustain itself with the people it has. It does not necessarily need more doctors from Romania, let's call it for an example, but Romania right now needs doctors. So does all these European countries, so does South America and so on and so forth, but not necessarily Africa. Now, passing on to my point, which is the worldwide end. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have developed countries on one side that can sustain themselves, that work really well as they are because they've proven it, they are developed countries. And we have developing countries which are right now struggling with certain issues of their own without putting immigration in the picture. And when we give to this resolution, when we pass this resolution and people actually remain in that country and can actually do something about it, then that developing country is not going to struggle that much. Because once we avoid the brain drain phenomenon, those people that are actually smart enough to do something about it are going to do it. And the idea is the experience part, which they go back to that country which they asked in their POI. Ladies and gentlemen, they don't need to go to that country to gain experience. Come on, it's the 21st century. We have TV, we have internet, we have experts that can go to that country through different NGOs that can help that country with the people there so that they can breed another generation of smart people so that maybe in 10 years will eventually bring that developing countries to a developed country. Yes?
So why is it, you said that we're not talking about third world countries, so why is it the people from third world countries can go to these countries, the people from developing countries can't?
The problem with the third world countries are that right now they're having a lot of problems, and we have a bit of a problem there. We can't talk about immigration that have the same chances, because let's face the fact, third world countries need to take steps for themselves to become a developing country, and then we're going to talk about the resolution. Now, once we have a developing country that keeps its people, that keeps its workforce, keeps its brain inside the country and seeks help from developed countries, that means more developed countries in the world. What does having more developed countries in the world mean? Well, basically a better world, a better economy without underpaid, overpaid, actually the right price. Once we have all countries that understand what that means, we have a better competition between countries, because actually right now developing countries cannot compete with a developed country. Why is that? Because, ladies and gentlemen, when you hear about America, you're sure you're going to hear about quality products, but when you hear about, I don't know, let's say Ethiopia, for example, you're quite sure you're not going to be hearing about quality products. So basically this competition actually needs to be pushed forward, and this competition between countries actually is something good, it's something we strive for. So what have I told you in the end? In the end, we have a world in which developed countries can live for themselves, can actually live without this immigration, but at the same time, on the other hand, we have these developing countries that need their people inside, that need those doctors, those engineers, those people that emigrate to other countries in seek of a better life. And why do they need it? Because basically, once they keep them inside, they're going to become themselves a developed countries. And all the problems which they face right now, and which are the reason they want to move, will disappear. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes, I would like the first opposition's second speaker to continue the debate.
We have seen a side proposition so far that has based their entire case on an assumption. The assumption is that people enjoy being trapped and caged in their own countries, which really doesn't serve them too many benefits. Okay, so what I will be doing today is, first of all, doing some extensive rebuttal of second proposition's points, and then I will be bringing up the third and last point of side opposition's case, which is the harms of not legalizing immigration, and then last of all, I will be reconstructing side opposition's whole case. So now, without further ado, let's take a look at what side proposition has told us so far. So their point was how it affects the world, how it has the worldwide impact, and how there's a long-term and short-term impact. So the main key distinction that we'd like to point out is that some lesser developed countries can sometimes be third world countries. We think that when a country is developing, and then sometimes that it has like war raging on. And so we think that it's really, really unfair to just not allow the people to move. It's not fair to allow people just to make people stay in a country where they potentially have really no tangible benefits, and to have like, why are we stopping people from moving into a better life? So we actually don't think that this is fair for the people, and we don't think that this is what should happen. And the next point is that we think that side proposition's whole case has been basically sticking on a band-aid to solve a major problem. We think that they automatically assume that people want to move because like they don't want to serve their own countries because of the benefits that they can get from another country. So first of all, we ask, why is this a bad thing? Why should people not be allowed to stay in their own, like move to another country to get like better things offered to them? And second of all, we think that they've forgotten a major point. Is that the fact that even though some people immigrate, most people stay in that country. We think that even though some people move because they have the ability, the resources, then we think that these people should potentially like be allowed to move. And we think that most people like in the developed countries like would just stay in the country and work to make it a better place. Yes.
Well, as I just said, the people that will stay in the developing countries are average Joes. Are people that do not offer quality service.
Okay, well, we actually think that, like, not, say, like, there's 10 doctors in, like, a lesser developed country. We don't think that, like, all of those 10 doctors will immigrate. We think that maybe, like, 2 will, like, or, like, 1 or 2 would immigrate, but we really don't think that it's realistic to say that all of the doctors would, like, move or immigrate. So we think that that is really a major flaw that side proposition has to realize. And we, like, think that it's funny that they're saying that we're not allowing that, like, we're basically, by letting this resolution pass, we're basically saying that, okay, so if there are 10 doctors and we're not even letting the 2 move, and like 8 will stay. So we think that this is like a potential flaw in their case, and we don't really think that this is logical. And we also think that, like, basically what they're doing is to, like, put a band-aid on the major problem. We think that these developing countries aren't really developing because there are obviously, like, potential harms that can, like, stop them from developing. So we think that, like, after, like, all of this time, like, if this problem has still not been solved, then we think that it's, like, major that we need to, like, recognize it and, like, do something about it. No, thank you, not at this time. So now I would like to get into my point, or my constructive point, about how if we don't legalize immigration, then there could lead to many potential harms. So in this point, I will be dividing it into 3 subparts, which is overpopulation and restrictions and legal immigration, like war attacks. So we think that, first of all, the point about like overpopulation. We think that many countries right now are developing because many of their citizens live in slums and they don't have the basic needs met, and they have a lack of electricity, lack of food, lack of clean drinking water. And we think that, no thank you. We think that when a nation can't support everyone in their country, which is why they're essentially like developing, no thank you. We think that like the logical response would be to like allow some people to move if they wanted to. We think that this would actually like help the nation even more, because if some of their people like move or immigrate to get better lives, we think that like the people who immigrate would get better lives, and people who stay would like would be better supported because they will have the resources, or like they will have better lives because like a part of their population like moved. We think that the nation would actually be like able to support their people better. So we think that that is the first point. Yes.
Rather than keeping them in the country and educating them by putting in an extra effort, we're just gonna let them leave and wander and do whatever they do, not having any resources.
Okay, well, like I said, like once you like educate like I don't know, like young people, as you said, we think that it's their freedom and their right to move to a different country if they wanted to. We think that like most of them would stay because like not all of them would want to move. There's no like 10 out of 10% that like I guarantee that like everyone would move. So we think that only like a very few number of people would move. So like most of them would still stay. So we really don't think that that point still stands on proposition. So the next part of it is like restricting global community. We think that like people should have the right to be mobilized, to be able to like move in different places and to develop and lead better jobs and better lives. Like we think that when people feel like unfulfilled in their own country, they should have the right to move. Like we don't want people feeling like they're trapped in their own country because like their work isn't really like benefiting them in any way. So we think that this is like why they should be able to move. And then we also think that like a lot of these lesser developed countries can be third world countries, and when war breaks out, like where are all these refugees gonna go? Like we don't really think that it's fair to say, okay, if war breaks out, like no one can come to like a more developed country because like your country is potentially like in flames and in like corruption and things. So we actually don't think that this is fair to like cut off all the people that could eventually like come as like a refugee, because we think that like if war breaks out, they should be able to move to get like better lives. And the next point of harm is the fact that like if people want better lives, they do it anyway, so they do like whatever it takes to move, which would lead to more illegal immigration. So I have thoroughly rebutted like side propositions case so far, and I have presented our last point. So do a quick reconstruction. Side props points were taken down by my partner Lily, and then we have Steve. Yeah, this is why we oppose resolution.
Okay, and after the brief Jumanji interlude, I would like the next speaker to continue in the debate.
Mr. Speaker, the only reason I'm happy for why Turkey is not part of the European Union is not because I don't like immigrants. It's because I believe that by having these people forced to live in a country where there's political pressure, they have a choice. Either they accept it or they change it. On our side of the house, we believe that by having immigration made illegal, we essentially force people to either accept something or change the situation. In our case, we believe that human nature basically forces people to think, well, look, I'm not going to accept this crappy life, I'm going to do something about it. Like, in terms of that, I'm going to be talking about two main things. I'm going to be talking about the importance of political pressure within the developing world, something which we think they've completely ignored so far, and then I'm actually going to clarify, actually talk about the real economics of the developing world. But before that, let me just handle a small few things. Like, just to make it clear, like, we think both sides of the house have pretty much come to this, like, idea. If immigration is legal, people come there, to developed countries for experience, and then they save money. If it's illegal, they come for experience, and then they have to go back. Like, if that's the motion so far, great. Like, then secondly, in terms of war, like, we think this is a special case. We don't think refugees fall under the definition of immigrants, and we think that if that's what they wanted to do, they should have done that during the first speech instead of second, and try to challenge their definition. We accept their definition, and we're going to move on with that. So yeah, moving on to this importance of political pressure. Right? What we see in the developing world is we're seeing a huge demographic boom. They talked about growing populations, right? We're going to see birth rates currently in African countries, South American countries, and other developing countries are pretty much going to have a five-fold, eightfold increase in different countries during the next 50 years. This will put pressure, social, economic, and political pressure on these countries. People will feel like they want to move, right? This is what pressure does. Like, if it becomes unbearable or hard to live in a country, people will want to move, right? That's the thing. If we make it illegal, they're going to have to stay, the vast majority. Sure, we completely accept there will probably be some illegal immigrants. We accept that. We think in the vast majority of cases, people will probably stay because, one, they don't want to be punished, for, doing something illegal, right? So what we see is, during these next 50 years, we're going to see so many big tensions over scarcity of resources or social tensions because of corrupt governments, because of foreign companies coming in, taking over domestic industries, and other social issues. We believe that this will force people to basically say, look, we don't want corruption, we don't want bad governments, we want change. And this is something that we think is going to happen with this motion, right? Then we have this idea of the fact is, to have this change, you need to have a vocal minority, right? the people like the academics who go abroad for a few years and then come back and basically, take these Western liberal ideas and say, look, hey guys, we don't like dictatorship. Maybe we should, do something different. Like even the political activists should stay in the country. We want to stay. And even these persecuted people, we say, don't flee. Face the facts. Don't run away. Like we need you to have. You know why? Because firstly, by having a vocal minority in these countries, you get the political discourse against the established paradigms of the society. This is something that does not happen if these people do. Yes.
So we're talking about having people have the ability to go back to their home countries and really change the game. You think someone with no experience in actually working in the developed world would be able to fully impact the people back home when they bring knowledge back?
I'd say look at the Arab Spring, look at Turkey. These are perfect examples. Literally, I'm going to be talking about this. But what we see is when we have a vocal minority in these developing countries, the international community takes an interest, and we get NGOs, we get individuals in these countries interested. They start helping these people, they put pressure on the governments, and this causes change. Look at Turkey right now. We have almost 1 million people across the country demonstrating a government that's pretty much just saying, okay, we're not going to follow Ataturk's dream, we're going to screw secularism, and we're just going to do it the Islamic way. People are saying no, and the international community is helping them out there. So yeah, then essentially, because they can't move, they have to change the system. But yeah, anyways, moving on to this idea of economics of the developing world, what we see is industrialists and the capitalist system, the globalized system, they're attracted by large unexplored markets. What happens when you have a huge population boom and these people don't have the services that they need? Essentially what we think is that domestic, foreign companies might come in, obviously after some political pressure, removing corruption from these companies and so on. We think that they would probably want to explore these markets. We think it's a good thing. Another thing is though, by having a large population that has, in a country that has a strict immigration or migration policy, we think that they can be flourishing. We think that there's an assumption made by their side of how so far, and it's somewhat flawed. We think that China is the perfect example of what happens when you have a huge population with strict immigration policy. For instance, during the last decade or so, we've seen the largest increase of the quality of life in recorded history. We're seeing that the vast majority of people working in these, so-called, sure, the quality of,
on that point,
the work conditions might be a bit bad, but they're getting better. You can read that in Economist or any single, trade newsletter about economics in general. We see that more people are getting access to food, electronics, and so on. But even so, we think that by having these people stay, some people will probably become entrepreneurs. Instead, entrepreneurs probably want to have business opportunities elsewhere, but if they're forced to stay in their country, we think domestic industries will benefit. Then we have the idea of this entire export-import cycle. We think that by having more people in your country creating wealth, you produce more wealth in the country. That means you can import more things. That leads to more global trade, which is always good, and that also leads to a higher quality of life. We think that this, in general, in these developing countries, we think that this will create more accessibility to different resources, things that you usually need, and it will also become cheaper for the general population. Another thing is, sure, we completely accept that an individual in a developing country might do some good. They might gain some personal benefit. But by having a population that's forced to stay in a country where, the flood barriers are breaking, we think the benefits are better. We think that putting the individual before the collective is completely irresponsible in this case. Essentially, it's like a flood barrier, or a dam. By releasing some water, the dam is probably going to work, nicely, right? But by keeping everything in, eventually it breaks. And by having this break, we destroy economic dispute, we destroy, political oppression, and we destroy bad government. So for the reasons of, political pressure, changing the developing world in general, and because of the economics behind it, we beg to propose.
So, Mr. Speaker, when we look at the developed nations around the world today, we see that over the grand history of the human race, they grew at a snail's pace. space. Like for the fact of the UK growing from like way back in the imperial days all the way up to where it is now, it took a long time for that to happen, with a lot of great things happening. Same with the United States. And we don't necessarily say that in a 21st century where we can share information, where we can share experiences, so that way one country can develop faster than the snail's pace, rather than sacrificing a whole lot of generations to, economic slumber. We don't want to see that happen, and we don't know why side government is standing so firmly on the ground, that we need to have them grow at such a slow, monotonous pace. And what we actually say is it's best for the developing nations to have immigration happen, for them to be able to get inspired and get interacting with the first world. And actually, the bridging of those gaps is going to help them on a much larger scale. But before I get into this extension for side opposition, what we're going to be talking about is changing the game in the developing world. Let's first rip down this extension point that we saw by side proposition, because we see this massive contradiction. Because they talked about developing worlds is not Ethiopia. It's not this revolutionary place where people are dying in wars and all that sort of thing. Then they come out in this first subpoint of their extension and talk about changing political revolution. We're not talking about, we need political revolution in places that are politically all right. We don't see how this crosses over. We think they directly contradicted their case. When they're talking about places that need this political revolution because people are oppressed, because people are, put under dictatorships, because of all those things in the Arab Spring, we see those places are not developing nations. Those are third world countries. We need to do something in those nations, and they aren't affected by this motion. So we don't see where that comes from. Furthermore, what we'd say, Mr. Speaker, is that people coming out and interacting with and I'll talk about this more international diplomacy in the third subpoint of this extension. But when we have people interacting and actually having representation in Canada of say Iranian people, or interacting in Canada from Bulgarian people, Bulgarian people are not isolated to the Bulgaria's diplomacy. They start to interact and build friendships and relationships in the Canadian community that helps them actually bridge the gaps that they need bridged in order to have better diplomacy. But we'll talk about that in this extension material. We see that this first point about vocal minorities and political pressure totally falls on their extension. Let's look at the second idea, that the economics. So they're talking about foreign profit. They're talking about countries coming in, China coming in, entrepreneurship in there, and then they make their money, while the developing country has nothing. Again, we talk about China going into the Ethiopias of the world, but totally casting that aside, Mr. Speaker, what we would say is for someone to have this understanding of entrepreneurship. By the way, China is graduating with some of the most degrees in America. The PhD holders and master's holders are mostly Oriental people, not even Americans. And then the people working in American economics are also Chinese people, gaining that experience that they then take back to China. So China is a terrible example for side proposition to bring up. Furthermore, what we would say is even if they were a great example to bring up to help their case, that China needs to still interact with Chinese people still need to interact with America, so that those ties are good, so that way they can have good trade economics. We see America and China interacting very well on the international economic stage. Sure. So we don't see why caging people in is better in a world that needs you to branch out, or do you think we should change Chinese people into China?
Well, we are not discussing tourism, people going there, or I don't know, just taking up we're discussing long-term workers in that country.
Okay, so we are going to totally come out and say, your long-term definition is such a skewed random number. Is this 5 years, 10 years, 25 years? That's a shaky point already. But if we're talking about long-term work, Chinese people have been working in America for a very long time. Ever since we saw back when China started to integrate with the American nation a long time ago, when they started having their initial booms of coming into Ivy League universities. That's when they started getting educated, and a lot of those people are still there. But they have, in case you haven't noticed, entrepreneurs don't have one stream of revenue, and if they're doing well, they don't stay in one country. So why would it be bad for someone to make business in America, take the experience that they learned back to China, or build business in America and bring a lot of that back to China, like we've seen with these two great examples of that we see coming out of Saudi Arabia, or India. Sweet. So we looked at, and I'm going to bring those up in my extension material, but we see so far extension material on Gov has totally fallen this far, because economically it isn't better for these countries to stay caged in, to not have the benefits of interacting with the first world, and also we see politically, either they're talking about the developed war-torn countries or they're not, and they've said that they're not, so we don't buy it. And two, we still think that politically you're going to need to make international friendships with the powerful people by having your population integrate with theirs. So let's get into this extension material for side government. But actually before that, we'd like to first establish what the clash has been thus far. Because we've seen a lot of this debate that this House believes that immigration from developing countries should be made illegal. We think that you have to prove devoutly that in like all cases, immigration is bad. Because like when we're saying illegal, we're not talking about specific types of immigration. We're talking about anything to do with people going from one country to another bad. We see that like in a lot of circumstances, all we have to prove that like there are many significant circumstances where immigration has been good. Maybe not every single circumstance, but like enough circumstances for it to be substantial. And what we're talking about right now, especially in the interest of the developing world, which we think has been a major point of clashing, though, has like opening up, has tried, but there's a lot of announcements that they have this. So let's like develop that in the extension material right now. Talking about changing the game, significant examples of when we need for developing nations' sake. So first of all, let's talk about the bringing knowledge back point, which is kind of touched by on off. But like, why did the people go back to developing nations once they've left? Like, as Prop has tried to mention, like they have it pretty good. They're chilling in a beach house. They're in Miami with a bottle of Chardonnay. Like, why would they go back to a place where they like have everything gone? Like the place that they left. We see like two main reasons. One, the fact that like when you have a successful level of business, like you are someone who wants to try and expand, and you do know a lot about your hometown. So if I'm someone who's like we mentioned, like we're going to talk about two Indian examples here. Anil Ambani, who's a guy who went to Harvard, he went to school and born in the USA. He worked in the USA, became a real estate guru there, and then took his progress back to India because he knew the Indian market, and actually managed to change the game for India by creating a lot of infrastructure that wasn't there before and using his expertise there. And also Tata Motors, who had, went to business school in Harvard, and like he became a business like guru in the United States, and then took it back to India and changed the automobile industry there because they know the turf of India and they can capitalize on that to make their profits maximize. And that's something that like all people want to have. Furthermore, I would say that like you want to help your place that you came from. Like if this was something that was like good to you, India was like my hometown. I'm not just gonna leave India and then like never think about India again, especially if I have the means to help them. Because all my loved ones are back there, my nationality is back there, that's something I'm not gonna want to ditch. Which is why we say even when people aren't these massive business tycoons, we still say that they help their country. Because if an immigrant worker who's working at 7-Eleven, who isn't necessarily a doctor, is not contributing like maybe to like this massive developing nation and is helping out, he's going to be sending money back to his family at home. He's giving them a means, like because he couldn't support his family there, he comes here, he makes some money and goes back home. Something that he's doing there, or he's sending money back home. He's doing things that he could not do in his home country to support his family, and that was pretty significant. And we see that it's something that really needs to happen. So by means of like bringing knowledge back, we think that it's really important that we see
Andalusia conqueror Tariq Nusiyat once conquered a fleet, and it was only one ship against a lot of ships. What he did, he burned the ship, and he told the people on the ship, you either fight in front of you, the enemy, and get victory, or you have to swim back and down in the sea. What they did is they fought for victory, and they won something that was totally against the odds. This is what we promote here. We're not giving people the easy way out to the individuals. We think if we pressure them into that they have this, that they would have to stay, they would have to come back to their country to provide for it, to help this country. We will see more people going back to their country and doing this because it's simply illegal that they stay away for too long. What they say on side opposition is, well, people will willingly go back. Some people, they give us a couple of examples, some people will willingly go back. So they acknowledge that people going back is a good thing. Thank you for agreeing with us. When they think that people going back is a good thing, then why do they not take it to the extreme? Why do they not think that it's good that we have a policy, create a policy for everyone to go back and not just rely on the people who willingly want to go back? Why is it that we have a policy that makes sure a lot of those people, most of those people, or all of them hopefully if the law works, that they all go back? So they agree with us on principle, but the mechanism they do is, well, we'll just leave it for choice. Hopefully they will want to go back because they have their loved ones. But we think have a policy. Now to clarify the definition before I go on is, we talking about immigration in long term. We don't care if it's 5 years or 10 years, but we're talking about people not residents in the new country. They can go for a study exchange, they can go for an internship for a couple of years job or something, but they have to come back. It's not long-term immigration, and that can be specified more in their own contracts. Now, what I'm going to do in this week's speech is I'll talk to you about the three main stakeholders in this debate. It is the immigrant, individual immigrant, the developing country that they leave, and the developed country that receives them. Firstly, to start with the immigrants, what we heard is, it's freedom of movement. Now, yes, we agree. A lot of individuals, they should have freedom of movement. But again, we're going to show you, and we've shown you in a comparative, that this is outweighed by the benefits that come out of taking away this little part of their freedom. We're still allowing them to freely move for study exchanges or for internships or things like that. And we think this is nice, so people should move and gain experience. They should share knowledge in the world. But we are taking away from them the freedom to stay away because their countries really need them, and we have to make sure that they provide back. No, thank you. They told us, well, children should have the right to go. Well, we told you in our extension that there is a big problem with the demographics here, because the demographics, if you're giving away all the young people, you're going to have the old people staying, and that's not going to be very productive for the country. Now, they talked about refugees, and what if it's children and it's war? Now, let me clarify this. War is a special case. We can't talk in an immigration policy in general in the whole world and then talk about only, when it's war, we have to accept people because otherwise they will die. We clarified this in the opening team in the definition, and it was not challenged until later during the debate, so we don't accept that. And I will explain to you what the extension speaker of the last speaker said about this. He said there is a contradiction because you're telling us war is a special case, but at the same time, you're telling us that people should fight and revolt and stuff like that. Now, revolting on a government that's treating you badly is not the same thing as war. It's not the same thing as drones. It's not the same thing as helicopters shooting you down, right? It's a different kind of revolution, and we promote that, and we think that is good, and that's what we brought to you in our extension, that there will be more pressure on political change when these people are back, and then they have a choice, either to make things better or to live a crappy life. And we believe that people will fight to make things better when that's the only option. When they have another option of going to another country and getting a better job or quality for their life and their families, they would probably choose that. But we think it's a larger benefit when they are forced to go back and to actually put some pressure on avoiding this, eliminating this corruption and such. So what we told you on the side of the immigrants, we told you they would get underpaid. They told us there is a contradiction if they're underpaid and taking their jobs. Well, clarification, the first speaker here never said they're actually taking their job. They said that's a misperception that's created in the people, and that creates discrimination, and furthermore, it creates violence sometimes. We've seen a lot of Turks being killed, their houses being burned a lot in the last 20 years in Germany, for example. So we think that this is something that hurts most immigrants that come to these countries, so it's better for them if they stay in their own sometimes anyway. Now, the last speaker told us, why would they go back? It's just, you want to help, you want to go back to your loved ones and stuff. And I explained to you this in the introduction. If we believe in this principle that more people, if they go back, they would help more, let's just make it a policy so that we can actually have actual help. Now, I'll explain to you about the developing country. They told us, firstly, if you have 10 doctors in this country, only 2 will move, not 8. Now, how do they make this assumption? They give us some reasons why people choose to move from these countries. They didn't give us any reasons, but I assume they have some in their heads. Now, these reasons, why would these reasons apply only for 2 out of 10? If these reasons are general for this country and for this profession, then all those people will follow the same logic, and so most people will probably move, right? So we saw no logic explaining this, so we think the brain drain very much still stands. They told us later, well, when a country has slums and people that are really poor and can't support them, you should at least give them the freedom to move. Yeah. That's better, right? When you can't even support the people in the slums, now allow the people who are actually going to help them, the people in that country who are probably going to help the people in the slums, let's allow them to move away so that the slum people get an even worse situation. That's crazy logic. They didn't tell us anyway how that's going to work, how that's going to help the slum people and not actually hurt them. And they told us, we're supporting a slow pace in this. No, we're not supporting a slow pace. We're supporting a very fast pace where people go to developed countries, get the experience, go back, and make sure that they develop their countries. If we leave it to only those who are willing to go back, that's going to be slow pace because there are going to be only a couple of them. But if we make it a policy, people will come back, it will be a very fast pace, and in the long run, these developing countries will be developed, and then we can trade with them, right? As we explained to you in our extension. We can trade with these countries that are developed, and that outweighs so much, outweighs the benefits that we get as a developed country that receives those people, right? So that's what they told us on the developed class. They told us, the developed countries, there's going to be a peak in economics. People are working here. They're doing, yes, sure, we agree. There will be. We think when immigrants come to developed countries, yes, they peak the economy somewhat. But we think this is so outweighed by how this economy will peak by trading with these countries if these people go back and make it develop really fast, their own countries, right? So if their own countries develop really fast, because those people come back, we'll have a peak in trade. And that will, in effect, help the developed country to trade with the developing country and peak both economies. So we explained to you this in our extension. Now, yes, we agree to some extent freedom of movement is important, but we think that the way we limited it, which is not really prohibited, that small limitness, is a worthwhile price to pay for economic growth.
You can commence.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Speaker, what we see today is an economy of two types of people who are going to be living in these countries. And they brought up a POI. A, there's the great people, and B, there's the average Joes. Now, we see what happens with the average Joe that leaves the country. Let's say he's, a man from a developing country who works at a 7-Eleven in the United States, right? So what this man does is, he isn't doing anything at home for his country in the first place. He's probably either begging or he's working at a factory or something. He's not doing anything. He's not helping progress the local economy. But what he's doing is that he's going to the 7-Eleven and he's making minimum wage, which is a lot more than he'd make at his home from where he's from, and he's sending money back. So from that angle, he's helping grow his local economy because he's inputting money into the country and helping his family survive, helping his family grow, helping to educate his children. So that's one aspect of growth. The second aspect is from the people who are great. And I give you an example of what's his name? Ray Tata. He went to Harvard Business School, right? And this man was poor, and he got a full scholarship to Harvard. He went to Harvard, and he worked at Goldman Sachs for 15 years. He became a partner at Goldman Sachs. He ended up leaving, going back to India, and starting up a motor company. And now what he created was the first car that's fully functioning. No, thank you. And it's worth $100. Now people who have $100 can drive around India. That's a pretty big impact. Because I don't know about a car that's $100 in such a huge market, right? We see people who are great and who know the whole market will come back and try and make an impact. I'm going to be talking about two questions that I feel boil down this debate and show you why side op, specifically second op, have won this round. The first thing, can developing countries benefit? They've stressed time and time again, by keeping these people in a pressure cooker in their countries, that they'll magically develop. They said that NGOs and tutors can come in and teach you the basics of developing an entire country. We say that's not true. We say that if I have a video tutorial about how to run a business, I still won't know how to run a business. I think, and what we say, is that the best way to learn how to run a business is to go work for a business in the United States or in a developed country, so you see how it runs and you can bring it back to your home country. You see the intangibles of development, and you're able to bring it back. Because there's no other way you're able to bring the intangible experience. We said that experience is the #1 thing. You see, time and time again, people who are successful say they learn from their experiences. This is something that we value, and they won't be able to get the necessary experience in a developing country. What we say also is that we look at the business example, you look at India, right? Experience, we talk about bringing knowledge back, but when you're successful, you want to bring it back. You have emotional ties to the place you came from. If you're from Czech Republic and you go to the United States, you still love Czech Republic, you still follow Yager, you still love everything about the Czech Republic, but you go to the United States, you work, you try and develop that experience, but in the end, when you're 45 years old, you made a lot of money, you want to come back home. And when you come back home, you're going to make an impact with all the money you've brought, because you still want to do business. You're going to make that impact.
Sir.
Actually, I'll take you.
I was going to ask, what makes you so sure that I'll go back when I'm 45?
Because there's proof that it's happened before. There's proof that people want to do it. And we said, like, you know, emotional ties are something that are very, very important. The fact that, like, if my entire family is living in Africa, and I've gone to the United States, I want to go back and see my family. Maybe not immediate, but my uncles, my aunts, my cousins, my grandparents, they're all there. I want to go back. We think it's pretty common sense to learn that you have emotional ties to people you care about and to where you originally came from, right? We talked about how interaction globally helps global trade and helps these countries grow, right? Because we also talked about internal level, how, like, what they propose is that you put people in a slow cooker and you wait for them to develop. Where we say that if you do that, they're either going to, two things are going to happen. They're going to go at a snail's pace, and they're eventually going to stop growing, or they're just going to explode, like what happens if you leave a pressure cooker on for too long. And then you have examples such as Greece, where, like, you know, everything is just a meltdown, or Egypt, right? You see, like, you know, the economic meltdown in Greece is a perfect example of how, like, there are countries that aren't doing well because, you know, there's a lack of experience, there's a lack of that job understanding and business understanding. There's a perfect example of how things can go bad. The second question is about, essentially, do the harms outweigh the benefits? And, like, their entire side has come up here, and they said essentially the same thing, right? Down the bench. Is that if they leave, they won't come back, and developing countries will stay developing countries. Now, we say that's flawed in there. We think that the analysis is flawed. We say that the benefits are insurmountable, and we provided you with a plethora of benefits. They're unable to get the experience needed. We feel that my partner came up here and it accurately shut down their extension. We showed you that, like, it creates an incentive for people who don't have the means to go anywhere and immigrate anywhere to work harder so that they can immigrate anywhere. Because if I can't buy myself a plane ticket to the United States, but my cousin can, I'm going to want to work 10 times harder so that I can buy my plane ticket to the United States and immigrate, right? So, like, there's going to be a lot more hard work. There's an incentive for people to go. There's an incentive for hard work with having people going to the United States and getting a taste of a better life. But furthermore, we feel that taste of a better life is motivation, and it creates an emotional impact on the people who have gone, and they want to bring it back because they want to share with the people they love in their countries. So thank you. Be able to bridge the gap, gaps and increase global diplomacy. We see that, like, just trade-off economics, you're able to improve those. We feel that immigration gives you a chance to learn, expand your horizons, and that you're really able to.
Okay, last chance.
Yeah.
So, like, given that Goldman Sachs has offices in over 130 countries, how come a Harvard graduate can't work in India at Goldman Sachs? Like, he could become, like, the CEO, like, no, the president of that branch.
Okay. But if you actually were to do your analysis, you realize that everyone who works at that Goldman Sachs hierarchy in India probably went to an Ivy League school in the United States. But furthermore, what we say is that experience in the United States, because after you worked at Goldman Sachs, he also helped run a business in their venture capital firms. He actually interacted with businesses in the United States. You're nitpicking at an example. I see what you're doing, but it's not that's not the point. One is that experience in a developed country is intangible, because you see how a developed country got to be developed. You saw the certain intangibles in a developed country that make it what it is today, right? Because you don't have the same business structures in America as you do in Kenya. In fact, you still have theft in Kenya. So what I'd like to say is that Science Opposition has proposed to you a solution propose a solution to helping developing countries become developed countries. We feel that our way is better, not their way. We feel their way, you're just putting a dagger in development. We feel our way, we're helping progress. Thank you.